Hi everybody, Chi here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be about oil and all the headlines that we've seen over the last few days in terms of why that price drop happened, why a fall in oil prices isn't always necessarily a good thing, and actually just a little bit of information about oil and how the price is set on the world market. If this sounds of interest to you or something that you could benefit from, do stay tuned. But if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can get an alert each time I upload a new video. For those that have been watching my videos, you know I like to get a few fun facts out of the way and a few definitions. So let's get started. Oil is known as black gold, black because that's its color when it comes out of the ground, and gold because it's so valuable. Oil is everywhere. It pretty much runs the world. So oil is actually the single largest contributor to the energy that the world uses, followed by coal and then natural gas. Despite the efforts of many groups to try and warn the world about using fossil fuels and the need to find an alternative, the world's need or thirst for oil just continues. Last year, the demand for oil rose to 100 million barrels a day, and that is up from 60 million barrels a day back in the 1980s. So it's used in so many items that you might not even think about, like clothing, medical equipment, foam mattresses, the coating on television screens, chewing gum, dentures, toothpaste. There are just too many items to mention here. The single biggest use of oil is clearly fuel. So we've got cars, trucks, and any road vehicles using up to 40% of the oil produced in the world, and then when you add on aviation, that rises to 60%. So any efforts to try and get the consumption of oil down is really going to have to rely on all of us taking a very close look on how we get around in the world. And I now want to talk about OPEC. So this video is going to be fairly lighthearted. It isn't going to be too technical, but the oil market is actually quite a technical industry. So I'm going to have to bring in some technical terms, but I'll do my best to explain them. So we've got something called OPEC, and OPEC is a cartel, and it stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now this was set up back in 1960 by 5 member countries, and these were Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. And now it currently stands at 14 member countries. I won't go into all of the other countries, but suffice to say that the aim of OPEC is to control the supply of oil, to be able to minimize fluctuations in the oil price, and this is to protect both the countries that produce oil and the countries that consume it, because a change in supply, as you can imagine, will have an impact on the oil price. Now, one can say that they haven't been very successful in that over the last few days, because we saw a 30% drop when the market opened on Sunday evening, but that's the idea behind it. And it goes without saying that Saudi Arabia is one of the most influential voices in that group. Now, you can have countries that produce oil that are not members of OPEC, and one of those countries is Russia. Russia produces a lot of oil, but is not a member of OPEC. Sometimes you get tension within the group because what may be good for one country may not be good for another. So it's always a balancing act. And then you've also got a situation where countries that are not a member of OPEC, but are actually invited to their meetings, are encouraged to act in accordance with OPEC. For example, Russia, to try to control the price of oil. And that's basically what happened. An OPEC meeting where Russia was also involved, where the idea was to cut supply of oil to the oil markets. With the situation that currently is unfolding in terms of the health crisis that the world is facing, there is an expectation that demand is going to fall. For example, there are going to be less flights taken. People are just driving around a lot less. So the demand for oil is absolutely going to fall. And the idea behind that OPEC meeting was that if demand is falling, perhaps it may be a good idea for them to cut supply. And they wanted Russia to do the same. And Russia said, no, thank you. This happened late on Friday. The announcement was made. I mean, these meetings typically happen and they just go ahead and an agreement is reached and it's announced to the world and we all know what's going on. Nobody expected there to be no agreement out of this OPEC meeting. So when the markets opened again on Sunday night, there was just complete and utter carnage, because now you've got a situation where there's less demand, but supply is not being taken down to match that. So therefore, the price of oil absolutely has to fall. People might be saying, well, actually, if the price of oil drops, what is the issue? That means you pay less for your petrol at the pump. Surely that's a good thing. Well, not necessarily, because you've got a situation here where in the US, they've got shale companies. So fracking has gone through a bit of a boom in the US economy, and these companies require oil to be at a certain price in order to be able to function. So when the price goes below this number, then you have a situation where there could be bankruptcies. And just to give you some facts here, the US shale industry has about $6 trillion of debt which needs to be serviced. So if you're going to have stress in that industry where companies are not actually able to pay their debt or not actually able to make any money, this creates a knock-on impact in terms of worries about the US economy. And let us not forget, the US is one of the largest economy out there. So if there's a problem in the US, it has a massive impact on confidence and the world. So falling prices typically would be a good thing. What we want to see is falling prices in a very gradual manner. We don't want to see a 30% drop in one day. That is never a good sign. That's a sign of stress in a particular market. And also we want to see prices fall, not because of a disagreement at OPEC where there's too much supply and not enough demand, because at the end of the day, what generally tends to happen is that falling prices in the oil market generally tend to point to a slowing global economy, and a 30% drop in the oil market or in oil prices is just not pointing to a very good sign. Now, actually what happened is you had some US oil companies that were down by about 40%. So it just goes to show you the stress in the markets and the fears that people have. At the moment, we have real volatility in financial markets. I cannot emphasize enough how historical these movements are that we have seen over the last few days. History books are going to be written about the events over the last few weeks. The volatility we've seen, the health crisis engulfing the world, the demand shock, the supply shock, and now we've got a collapse in oil prices to deal with as well. So there's just a lot going on. I just want to clarify one thing, what I mean by when I say a demand shock and a supply shock. So a demand shock is when people just don't consume as much. So for example, let's just say you've got a manufacturer that produces cars, and people aren't going out and buying that car anymore for whatever reason, because they don't have enough money, because we're in a recession. That is what we describe as a demand shock. A supply shock is when a component of that car cannot be sourced, for example, because the factories are closed in the country that makes those components. That is a disruption to the supply chain and what we know as a supply shock. So at the moment, what we are facing in many countries and in the global economy is a little bit of a demand shock. No, not a little bit, a huge demand shock as a result of the health crisis. And now we've also got a supply shock in terms of what's going on in the oil markets, as in there's too much oil being produced for the current demand of oil. I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you have done so, do hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you can get an alert each time I upload new content. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, goodbye.